Anyway, let's talk protesters, shall we? Because you will have seen some of these scenes unfolding now in universities right up and down the country, actually. We've seen so many people taking to their tents with reams of demands, in some cases, about what they want their universities to do, or not do, should I say, when it comes to the situation in Gaza. Matt, you are a university professor.
Yeah.
I mean, I can get some of these images on the screens. We can go through some of these demands in a second. There you go. First things first, how much of a kind of say over the goings-on in terms of where funds get invested and all the rest of it do you think university students should have?
Well, I think on this issue, what we've seen both in the US and the UK with these protests, I think firstly, I'm very comfortable with students being able to exercise their free speech and their free expression on campus to say what they really think about these issues. But what I don't think students should be able to do is dictate the policies of a university or indeed a democratically elected government. They should certainly not be able to disrupt university buildings, the teaching of other students, which we've seen in the US. They shouldn't be able to stage violent protests. They shouldn't be able to work with outside agitators to undermine the universities. And I think underlying the anti-Israel protests in both the US and the UK, what we've seen actually is the extent to which this very corrosive identity politics is now permeating universities across the West. It's simply impossible now to look at the universities and say we don't have a problem with higher education, because clearly we do. We have a very simplistic worldview that's taken hold of campus, which basically says Western nations are inherently evil, oppressive, bad and racist. The white majority is negative, including, by the way, Jews, who are seen as part of the majority group. And any and every minority around the world, from Palestine to Africa, is virtuous, is morally superior. We must align our institutions with those minority groups. Now that call it woke, call it social justice, call it identity politics. There is now a growing consensus among academics on the left and the right, from Yasha Monk on the left to Chris Rufo on the right, that this is now a real problem in the universities, and we need to really push back hard against this corrosive ideology.
Do we need to push back hard against this stuff, Jonathan?
I think it's a gross oversimplification, what Matt has just said. No one is saying that the Saudi Arabian regime is something that we should aspire to for its sort of enlightened values, and sort of Jews are part of the problem. That's an outrageously anti-Semitic thing to say. The vast majority of these students are not anti-Semitic. They're not racist.
Well, hold on. That's not an anti-Semitic thing to say. Well, just what I'm saying.
No, I'm not saying you're
anti-Semitic.
I'm not saying you said something anti-Semitic.
Implicitly mainstreaming anti-Semitism.
I'm saying that if the students were saying that Jews were part of the problem, that would be an anti-Semitic thing to say. Clearly, I have not seen evidence that anywhere close to a majority is saying anything like that. It's a very small minority of people who are using racist tropes, and obviously we should condemn those people unequivocally. But that is not what we're talking about. Look, I agree with you that we need free speech on campus, and it's extremely telling and predictable that the number 10 has called in some university officials to talk about
17 universities.
When given that the Conservative Party has made such a big deal about having a free speech czar, but to enforce the right to hear diverse opinions on campus. But lo and behold, it turns out that the opinions they really want to enforce are the opinions shared by the Conservative Party. So I am wary about this. Obviously, we have to deal with hateful speech, no matter where it comes from. But students have an absolute right, as Matt says, to express whatever opinions they like. What they actually manage to achieve is up to a negotiation between them and the universities concerned. But I absolutely don't subscribe to this oversimplified idea that Matt is saying, that these students think that we have goodies and baddies in this binary way. And actually what we're seeing when you listen to some of these students, they actually have extremely nuanced ideas, and actually quite a good grounding in a lot of the history behind this. They may not come to the same conclusions as you, but it doesn't mean that it's not valid to have those opinions and to seek change from the universities. And for what it's worth, a lot of these demands, I think, are quite reasonable. Reinvesting in Palestinian students, academics and scholars, given that Israel appears to have demolished all centres of higher learning in Gaza. That would seem to be an eminently sensible and reasonable request.
They want to do things like divest all the funds and collaborations away from basically any organisation that they would argue has too close ties to people or places like the Israelis. They want all of these finances. So where are these universities investing and spending money? They want all of that to be kind of made much more transparent, and they want to overhaul their universities' investment policies and so on and so forth. Anyway, are you oversimplifying all this?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you say that there's a nuanced view on campus. I don't recall seeing similar demands with regards to how universities engage with, let's say, China, or how universities deal with Saudi Arabia or corrupt regimes across Africa, because those don't fit into this very simplistic binary worldview, which the Palestine conflict is, the Palestine-Israel conflict is ideally is at the epicenter of. For these students, this is really about a very us and them zero-sum battle between the oppressors and the oppressed. Why should students be demanding where their universities invest resources in? What on earth has that got to do with their education and higher education? Why on earth should students be able to say how their universities, where they spend money, which banks they use?
Hang on, this is the product of capitalism. Actually, that's the product of the university model. That in the last 20 years, students have gone from being students who are sort of benefiting from a service to consumers and customers, because they're paying a fortune for their education, and they are putting money into those university coffers.
Well, the mums
and in
and
the
dads
same way
paying
that
it, but yeah.
when you're putting money, and the taxpayers have a right to know where the university is spending that money as well. When you are a consumer and you're a service user and you're paying good money for that service, it's actually, according to sort of capitalist norms, you have every right to know where that money is going and how the university is spending that money, whether you want to be associated with that, and to press for change. Now, should the universities bow to every demand? I'm not saying they should bow to every demand. I think it's notable that Trinity College Dublin, for example, has agreed to divest from certain corporations. Brown University in the United States has done something similar. There are different ways of going about this. A lot of these demands are quite reasonable.
This isn't just about capitalism. This is about prioritising the emotional safety of students. This is about treating students as though they are victims, as though actually we should pander to their every need and demand, and that is not how we should be running universities.
The other
thing is, imagine, because I just want to speak up for the Jewish communities here in Britain. Imagine.
Well, I'm a Jew. I slightly resent that because I'm Jewish myself, and you don't need to speak on my behalf.
Well, I've not heard you raise this point so far, but imagine how Jewish students on these campuses have felt, or indeed in the US, where they've been intimidated, harassed, beaten up, locked into rooms. They've been told by rabbis not to go onto campus because they are considered to be no longer safe for Jewish students. Should we just reflect on that for a minute? Because I haven't heard that so far. What I would like to see are all of the university heads, the Ivy League heads, who were summoned before Congress a few months ago, who were told to condemn in no uncertain terms anti-Semitism on campus. And what happened? 3 heads of the top Ivy League universities, Harvard, Penn State and MIT, they refused to condemn the anti-Semitism that was taking place on campus. Now, we all know...
Yeah, the Harvard head had to resign afterwards.
Well, she had to resign because of the outrage over her refusal to condemn anti-Semitism on campus.
Something bad happened,
so what I'm
saying
is, imagine any other form of prejudice. Imagine if it was any other minority group. Imagine if it involved African Americans or Hispanic Latinos or whatever, trans students. There'd be outrage. But because it actually involved Israel, and because it involved Jews, university leaders refused to take action and condemn that anti-Semitism. And this is where many people ask themselves, why are we funding these institutions that are just preaching anti-Western dogma? And that's a legitimate question, I think, for taxpayers.
I don't think that universities are preaching anything.
But what about the anti-Semitism issue?
Obviously, what do you expect me to say? That anti-Semitism is good? Of course that anti-Semitism should be condemned at every... And I think I probably have more experience of it personally than you do, actually, Matt, by the way.
That's why I'm surprised you're not speaking.
I actually am entitled to have a nuanced view, and actually my ethnicity doesn't have to dictate all of my political opinions. And this is actually quite fundamental to this debate, because Jewish people, lo and behold, are in fact a broad group of people. We're not all the same, we don't all believe the same things, and we're entitled to have different beliefs. The expectation that we will all think the same is in fact anti-Semitic itself. So, obviously, if there is a Jewish student who feels threatened in any way, I would absolutely want to extend my sympathy and to find out what exactly has been the threat made to those students, and if there is any evidence that those students have been threatened in any way, the firmest action should be taken against the culprits. But I don't think it's acceptable to say that because some Jewish students have expressed a kind of a feeling unsettled around campus, that we can therefore discount the entire set of protests and all the protesters who have been making points in a very, very valid way about what they see as the war crimes being perpetrated by Israel.